Your past doesn't need to defeat you. It only needs you to react once, and it will keep pulling you back for life, unless you learn how to choose differently every single time it appears. When you try to move forward in life, one of the most subtle but powerful forces you face is this. Your past is not just a memory, it becomes a comparison system in your mind. And that system is always active, even when you don't notice it. Because your mind doesn't experience life as something completely new every moment. It filters everything through what it already knows, through what it has already survived, through what it has already failed at, succeeded in, or emotionally stored. So even when you are stepping into something new, your mind quietly brings the past into the present. And this is where the real pull begins. You may want growth. You may want change. You may want a different life. But your mind doesn't only ask, what is possible? It also asks, what happened last time? And that question is where hesitation begins, because familiar pain feels safer than unknown growth. This sounds strange, but it is deeply human. Your brain is wired to prefer what it already understands, even if it is uncomfortable, because predictability feels like control, and control feels like safety. So even if your past contains struggle, disappointment, or limitation, your mind still recognizes it. It knows how to navigate it. It knows what to expect from it. But the future? The future feels uncertain, and uncertainty feels like risk. That is why, in many moments of change, people unconsciously drift back toward old patterns. Not because they truly want their old life, but because their mind is trying to avoid unpredictability. You might notice this in simple ways. You start something new with energy, but suddenly your motivation drops. You try to change a habit, but your old routine feels easier. You attempt to think differently, but old thoughts return without permission, and then something dangerous happens internally. Your mind starts romanticizing the past. It begins to say things like, at least I knew how things worked back then. Or maybe things weren't that bad. Or, at least I was comfortable in that version of life. And slowly, without realizing it, emotional memory starts becoming stronger than present intention. But what you have to understand is this. Your past feels safer, not because it was better, but because it is familiar. Familiarity creates emotional comfort, even if the experience itself was not ideal. Your brain prefers known discomfort over unknown possibility. That is the trap. So when you feel yourself being pulled backward, it is not always life pushing you back. It is your mind trying to protect you from uncertainty by returning you to what it already understands. And this is where growth becomes a conscious decision instead of an emotional reaction. Because if you rely only on feelings, you will often choose familiarity. But if you rely on awareness, you begin to see the pattern clearly. You start noticing that the pull toward your past is not logical. It is habitual. It is emotional conditioning. It is your mind trying to reuse old maps for a new journey. But your future cannot be reached with old thinking. You cannot step into a new life while constantly comparing it to an old one, because comparison creates hesitation, and hesitation weakens action, and weak action keeps you stuck in repetition. That is why this stage is so important. You are not just fighting external circumstances. You are learning to stop letting your past define your decisions. And the more you observe this pattern without obeying it, the weaker its control becomes. Because your past will always try to speak through memory. It will always try to influence you through familiarity. But it only has power if you believe it is still your direction. And the moment you realize that your past is not a place you are meant to return to, but a phase you are meant to grow beyond, is the moment the pull starts losing its strength, and your future begins taking control of your decisions. When you begin to change your life, something very unexpected starts happening. The parts of you that you thought you had already outgrown begin to return. Old habits, old reactions, old thoughts, they don't disappear as easily as you expect. In fact, they often become stronger the moment you try to evolve, and this confuses most people because they assume growth means a straight line upward. They think once they decide to change, the old version of themselves will quietly fade away. But real transformation doesn't work like that. It works in cycles, in resistance, in return patterns, and this is where the struggle begins. Old habits start reappearing during change, not because you are failing, but because your mind is testing stability. Your brain is a system built on repetition. Whatever you repeat becomes familiar, and whatever becomes familiar becomes automatic. So when you try to break that system, the mind reacts. It doesn't immediately accept the new direction. Instead, it tries to restore the old balance. You might notice it in subtle ways at first. You decide to become disciplined, but suddenly distractions feel stronger. You decide to focus, but your mind becomes restless. You decide to change your routine, but your old habits feel easier again. It feels like you are going backward, but you are not. You are actually in the resistance phase of change, because the mind does not give up its old patterns easily. Even if those patterns were limiting you, they were still familiar, and familiarity creates a false sense of comfort. So when you introduce new behavior, the mind compares it with the old one. And anything that feels unfamiliar automatically gets labeled as difficult, unnecessary, or too much effort. And that is when old habits begin to rise again. Not because they are stronger than you, but because they are more practiced. Think about it. Your old habits were built over months or years. Your new habits are still in the early stages. So, naturally, the old patterns feel more automatic. They don't require effort. They don't require thinking. They simply happen. That is why, in moments of stress, fatigue, or emotional imbalance, your mind tries to return to what it knows best. And this is where many people misunderstand their own journey. They think, I'm going back to who I was, when in reality, they are just experiencing the echo of old conditioning, because transformation is not about never feeling old patterns again. It is about learning how to not obey them. Old habits will always try to return during change because your brain is checking consistency. It wants to know whether the new direction is stable or temporary. And every time you resist the old pattern, you are sending a signal to your mind that the change is real. But every time you give in, the old system becomes stronger again. This is why change feels like a battle between two versions of yourself. One version wants comfort, repetition, and familiarity. The other version wants growth, discipline, and evolution. And both of them compete for control of your actions. But here is the truth. Old habits only feel powerful because they are automatic, not because they are correct. They are simply deeply wired behaviors that your mind has used for a long time. And anything deeply wired takes time to rewire. So when old habits return, instead of seeing it as failure, you must understand it as a test of direction. Are you still committed to change even when old patterns feel easier? Are you still aware even when your mind tries to pull you back? Are you still choosing growth even when comfort feels tempting? Because every time you choose differently, you weaken the old identity, and slowly, something begins to shift. The old habits don't disappear instantly, but they lose authority. They become less automatic, less controlling, less dominant. And your new habits begin to take their place, step by step, repetition by repetition. And over time, what once felt like a struggle becomes your new normal, because you didn't eliminate the old self by force, you replaced it through consistency. And the moment you realize that old habits returning is not a sign of failure, but a sign that transformation is actively happening within you, is the moment you stop fearing regression and start mastering real change. As you continue moving forward in life, there is a stage that feels very subtle but deeply powerful. Emotional triggers start reconnecting you with your old version of yourself. And most people don't even realize it is happening because it doesn't feel like a big event. It feels like a memory, a feeling, a sudden shift in mood, or a familiar reaction that appears without warning. And just like that, you are pulled back into an older emotional state. Because your past is not just stored in your mind as memories, it is also stored in your emotions. Certain people, places, sounds, situations, and even thoughts carry emotional imprints. And when something activates those imprints, your mind doesn't just remember the past, it re-experiences it. That is why emotional triggers are so powerful. They don't ask for permission. They don't announce themselves. They simply activate something inside you that feels familiar, and suddenly your present moment is no longer fully present. It is partially influenced by something you thought you had moved on from. You may be progressing in your life. You may be trying to build discipline, focus, or a new identity. But then something small happens. A message, a memory, a conversation, a familiar place. And your emotional state shifts instantly. And in that moment, it feels like you have gone backward. But what is really happening is deeper than that. Your nervous system is responding to stored emotional patterns. Your mind is not just reacting to the present situation. It is comparing it with past experiences that carried similar emotional weight. So even if you are physically in a new stage of life, emotionally you can be pulled into an old version of yourself without realizing it. And this is where many people lose their direction. Because they mistake emotional reaction for identity. They think, if I feel this way again, maybe I haven't changed. Or, if this emotion is still inside me, maybe I am still the same person. But that is not true. Emotions can reappear without controlling your identity, unless you let them, because emotional triggers are not proof that you are stuck. They are proof that your system still remembers what it has been through. And memory is not the same as identity. Your past can be activated, but it does not have to be repeated. However, without awareness, emotional triggers can quietly pull you back into old behavior patterns. For example, an old emotion of disappointment might trigger old thinking patterns of giving up. A feeling of rejection might bring back old habits of isolation. A memory of failure might activate old self-doubt. And suddenly, without noticing, you start behaving like a version of yourself you thought you had already left behind. Not because you consciously chose it, but because the emotion temporarily took control of your response. That is why emotional awareness becomes extremely important during transformation. Because powerful people are not those who never feel triggered. They are those who recognize the trigger without becoming it. They see the emotion, but they don't fully identify with it. They feel the pull of the past, but they don't obey it. They allow the emotion to exist without letting it decide their actions, and this is a skill that develops over time. At first, emotional triggers feel overwhelming. They feel like they define your entire state. But with awareness, something begins to change. You start noticing the pattern. You start seeing the gap between feeling and reaction. And in that gap, control begins to return. Because the real danger is not the emotion itself, it is unconscious reaction. Once you become aware that a feeling is being triggered, you gain the ability to pause. And in that pause, you are no longer fully controlled by the past. You are observing it instead of living inside it. And that observation changes everything. Because what you observe, you begin to understand. And what you understand, you stop fearing. In the same way, over time, emotional triggers lose their power, not because they disappear, but because you stop reacting to them automatically. And slowly, something powerful happens. You begin to recognize that your emotional past can surface without affecting your direction. You can feel something from yesterday without letting it control your today. You can remember something without reliving it, and that is true emotional strength. Not the absence of triggers, but the ability to stay grounded while they appear. And the moment you realize that your emotions can be activated without defining your actions, is the moment you start breaking free from the invisible emotional chains that pull you back into your past. As you move deeper into your journey of change, there is a stage that becomes extremely subtle but very powerful. Your mind starts using your past as a reference point for your future. And without even realizing it, this comparison begins shaping your decisions, your confidence, and your direction in life. Because the mind is always trying to protect you from uncertainty, it constantly searches for evidence. And the easiest place it finds evidence is your past. So instead of focusing on what you are capable of becoming, your mind starts asking questions like, what happened before? What went wrong last time? What if it happens again? And slowly, your past becomes a filter through which your future is evaluated. This is how limitation is created, not through reality, but through memory. Your mind begins to say things like, "You have tried this before," or "You couldn't do it last time," or "This is not really your strong area." And even though these thoughts are not physically real, they feel real because they are based on experience, and experience is powerful. But here is what most people don't understand. Your past is not a prediction, it is only a record. It shows what happened under certain conditions, with a certain mindset, at a certain stage of your life. But it does not define what is possible for you now, because you are not the same person anymore. Still, the mind does not automatically recognize that. Instead, it keeps replaying old outcomes whenever you try something new. And without awareness, this creates hesitation. You begin to second-guess yourself. You begin to slow down your decisions. You begin to reduce your expectations before even trying. And that is how your future gets limited, not by failure, but by memory of failure. This is why so many people feel stuck even when they have the ability to move forward. It is not that they lack potential. It is that their mind is constantly measuring new possibilities with old results. But growth does not work under old measurements, because every new attempt comes with a different mindset, different awareness, and different experience. You are no longer operating from the same level that created your past outcomes, yet the mind keeps using outdated data, and this creates internal conflict. One part of you wants to move forward, but another part keeps pulling you back into what already happened. One part believes in change, but another part keeps reminding you of repetition. And in that tension, action becomes weaker. This is where doubt begins to grow, not because you are incapable, but because your mind is using your past as emotional evidence against your future. And the more you listen to it, the more your confidence depends on history instead of possibility. But powerful people eventually learn something important. They stop treating their past as authority. They start treating it as information, not identity. Because your past can tell you what you have done, but it cannot decide what you can do next. And when you truly understand this, something shifts internally. You stop asking, "What did I fail at before?" And you start asking, "What is possible now that I am more aware?" Because awareness changes everything. Your past version of yourself did not have the same clarity you have today. It did not have the same understanding, the same discipline, or the same level of reflection. So naturally, its results were different. But that does not mean your future must repeat it. It only means you have data, not destiny. And once you stop allowing your mind to treat past outcomes as permanent limitations, your confidence begins to rebuild itself. Because confidence is not the absence of failure. It is the refusal to let failure define what comes next. And slowly, as you practice this awareness, something powerful happens. The emotional weight of your past begins to reduce. The fear of repeating old mistakes becomes weaker. The hesitation before new action starts disappearing. And your mind begins to trust possibility again. Not because your past changed, but because your interpretation of it changed. And that is the real breakthrough. Because the moment you stop letting your past decide your future potential is the moment you finally stop living inside old limitations and start moving toward the life that was always available to you beyond memory. As you reach the final stage of this journey, something very important begins to shift inside you. You start realizing that freedom from your past does not happen in one moment. It does not happen through one decision, one breakthrough, or one emotional realization. It happens through repetition. Because every time your past tries to pull you back, you are faced with a choice. And that choice is where your real power is built. You can either follow memory, or you can follow direction. And at first this seems simple, but in real life it is not. Because your past does not only return as thoughts, it returns as habits, emotions, reactions, and automatic behaviors. It returns in moments when you are tired. It returns in moments when you are uncertain. It returns when discipline feels heavy and comfort feels easier. And in those moments, the mind tries to convince you that going back is harmless. that one small step into old behavior will not matter, that you can return and still move forward later. But what you are really facing is a pattern, and patterns are not broken once and so they are broken repeatedly. This is why freedom from your past is not a single event. It is a continuous process of choosing differently, again and again, even when your mind wants to repeat what is familiar. Because every time you choose your future over your past, you weaken the emotional grip of old identity. And every time you choose your past over your future, you reinforce it. So your life is not shaped by one big decision. It is shaped by thousands of small ones. And this is where awareness becomes extremely powerful. Because once you start noticing the moment your mind tries to pull you back, you gain something most people never develop: the space to choose. At first, that space feels very small, almost invisible. The pull of old habits feels strong. The pull of comfort feels automatic. But in that tiny space between impulse and action, your future is decided. And the more you observe it, the stronger that space becomes. You begin to notice patterns. When you are stressed, you go back to old habits. When you are uncertain, you return to old thinking. When you are tired, your discipline weakens, and instead of judging yourself, you start understanding the system. Because your past is not controlling you directly, it is influencing you through repetition. But repetition can be changed, and that is where real transformation begins. You stop trying to erase your past. You stop trying to forget it. You stop fighting it emotionally. Instead, you begin replacing it through action, new response, new behavior. And slowly, something powerful happens. Your identity starts shifting. Not suddenly, but gradually, because identity is nothing more than repeated behavior over time. And when your repetition changes, your identity has no choice but to follow. But this process requires patience, because there will still be moments when the old version of you feels stronger, moments when your past feels more natural than your future, moments when you question whether change is really permanent. And in those moments, the only thing that matters is what you do next, not what you feel, not what you think, but what you choose to act on, because feelings will always fluctuate, thoughts will always change. But actions are what build direction. And when you consistently choose your future actions over your past reactions, something inside you begins to stabilize. You no longer feel like two different people fighting inside your mind. Instead, you start becoming one consistent direction, forward. And slowly the pull of your past becomes weaker. Not because it disappears, but because it loses authority over your decisions. It becomes a memory, not a command. And that is the final stage of freedom, when your past can still exist in your mind, but it no longer controls your movement. Because you have trained yourself moment by moment, decision by decision, to choose differently. And the moment you realize that breaking free from your past was never about escaping it, but about consistently choosing your future over it, is the moment you finally step into a life that is no longer defined by memory, but by the direction you choose every single day. The moment your choices become stronger than your memories is the moment your past loses its power and your real future finally begins to take control.